Good morning, everyone. Thank you, John. It's always been a pleasure to come to Victoria. I always feel like a bit of a fraud and a shyster coming down here and pretending that I should be able to tell you what to do with local government. But I do think that some of the things that we do in New South Wales, particularly around regional cooperation and collaboration, is some of the better models in Australia, and the work that we've been doing in our alliance, particularly over the last 10 years for New South Wales, has been one of the sustaining alliances. A little bit of background for me: I came to the Alliance 6 years ago. I've been in organisational development and business improvement roles for 20 years, and before that I was a midwife and delivered babies. So I've jumped from quite a different career into this one. But funnily enough, there's some similarities about managing people and managing emotions. Our alliance, as John said, and I have to clarify, in the program John's put us in the outback of New South Wales. We're actually in the Central West region of New South Wales. I don't know if any of you know where Orange Bathurst, that region is. Beautiful part of the world, great wine country. Our 4 member councils are, as you can see on the slide there, Wellington, Blayney and Cabonne, and we also have a water authority, Central Tablelands Water, as a member council. We came together in 2003. That was the last time New South Wales seriously looked at amalgamations. They came together to tell the truth, fundamentally to avoid amalgamation. But interestingly, as I said, this alliance has sustained now through 10 years, and we celebrated 10 years last year. I've spoken previously at the conferences about why I think that is, and we've won an award national level about actually looking at why collaboration works and the critical factors for collaboration. And I could talk to you about that at another time, but I'm going to focus today on shared services. So collectively we represent 11,400 square kilometres. We serve 14,500 ratepayers, and collectively we have just under 400 full-time staff. Our credentials to comment: as I said, we've been working together now on joint projects and initiatives that have achieved $5.2 million in savings for those member councils. We've completed over 55 projects or initiatives in that time. We started to seriously look at shared services models and moving our alliance away from a voluntary cooperative model and into a legal entity status about 3 years ago, and we partnered with AZL initially to do some research work. As I said, we've won the national award, and from a shared services perspective, before I came back into local government 6 years ago, I was in state government, and I was responsible in the western region of TAFE and schools for implementing shared services, and I can tell you there's some lessons to be learnt from that. I think somehow my experience with that gives me both joy and scepticism about whether shared services can work in this sector or not, but absolutely worth pursuing. Shared services means lots of things to lots of different people. This is the very long-winded Wikipedia definition if you want to Google it. It's fundamentally about, putting resources into one area and providing them for many. I like my definition, which is much shorter. What is currently done by many in the future is done by one for many. And that can be on many levels. It doesn't have to be at a high level of actual providing functional services. It can be as simple as what we do in the Alliance. A new policy comes in place and we have to write a policy document. We write it once and we modify it for the 4. We don't write it 4 times. So that's the essence that I believe that you can get from shared services. So when we started to seriously look at shared services and what it meant for our alliance, we sat down, and apologies that's not terribly clear, but if you get a copy of my PowerPoint, and again apologies, there's lots of data in this PowerPoint, but I thought you could be able to take it home if you want. We've been at this, as I said, working together now for 10 years and at shared services now since 2010, and I think we're probably still only just reaching into the design phase, the second column. So all that pre-work, all that political engagement, all the understanding, the stakeholder assessment, that takes a long time. And you have to develop some fairly strong relationships during that time for this to continue to move ahead, because I can tell you at any point, if any one partner pulls out, the whole thing can fall over. So it's not a fast process by any means, and I was saying to Graham last night, I find myself sometimes thinking, will we ever get there? but it's worth taking the time to make sure that your relationships are strong and that you work on your relationships, otherwise it won't succeed. So the most recent work that we've been doing sort of ramped up last year, and it was sort of running like scared rabbits again in the light of the New South Wales reform process. So whilst we had demonstrated we worked well together as an alliance, certainly the recommendations that, what did you call them, Graham? They're not recommendations, they're options, preferred options that were coming out of the review panel was showing that really councils need to start to think again seriously about their future capacity and their future sustainability. And we know our individual councils, whilst we work together as an alliance very well, our individual councils on their own are deemed to be unsustainable. So even more so, it's important for us to continue to work together and to continue to try and take that big next step of actually legalising this and moving into a different model of delivery. So there's 2 bodies of work underway. One is around the model. So I'll talk a little bit in a moment about the different options that you have for the delivery of shared services. But it's basically about looking at the legal entity arrangements, the governance arrangements, in our case the location, the roles of that organisation and the decision making and the board involvement. The other body of work, on the model work, we were lucky enough to have one of our councillors is a semi-retired corporate lawyer, so he's done all this pro bono work for us, which has been very nice. Looking at some of the legal structures and requirements for us, so that's been very good. Because needless to say, as all of you are constrained with being able to throw lots of cash around to do some of these initiatives, and we go cap in hand to our minister quite often and say, please can we have some money to do some of this work. And we'll continue to go cap in hand. The second body of work is the service selection and business case. We partnered with KPMG just before Christmas, and they've been working with us on that body of work. And that's really about defining how that entity would operate. And more importantly, in this first stage, developing a robust methodology for us to actually select the services. One of the traps I think that you can fall into, and I hear it from our general managers, and may I say, in 6 years, I have 4 general managers that I report to, and I'm on my 7th general manager collectively, and my 3rd council. So you can imagine each time that happens, how we've got to keep that conversation and re-engage people. So, but I do hear from the general managers from time to time, and before we had a methodology to apply, they would go, I think we should move environmental services in there. Why would you move environmental services? Well, we can't get planners. Well, what makes you think that the entity is going to be able to get planners any better than you can get planners? So don't go on gut instinct and things that you don't like doing and shove them over to somebody else to do. We wanted to have a robust way of actually having some credibility to the decisions that we were making about what functions could move out of the current arrangement and into a different arrangement. So that's fundamentally what we've been doing with KPMG up until we're about to enter 3rd stage with them. Just 1 minute. I talk fast and I get dry. So, as I said, the model work, and there's been lots of work done around this by lots of people. And as I said, my gift to you is there's some papers out on the front table that I brought along, and the one that I think is most relevant that you can either get off the LG Professionals New South Wales website, but I've brought a few copies out there, is that there was a working party formed last year in response to the reform agenda, looking at the different sorts of delivery models. And I won't go into the detail of each one of these different models, but the paper does. It talks about the pros and cons of each of those different models, and it's really quite a useful paper. As I said, we're a voluntary alliance, so we're non-binding. That's positive in the fact that you can be fairly fluid, but it's not so great if one of your partners doesn't want to join with you on a project. And at different times in the last 10 years, we've seen, a lot of work go into an initiative or project, and then one of the members pulls out and the whole thing falls over. So that's not so great. Then you go from that to legal entity arrangements, and there's a heap of them that you could look at. In New South Wales, we've got a strong ROC framework that's being looked at to be strengthened as one of the preferred solutions in the reform agenda. And there's other sorts of things there. And the CCOs in New Zealand, if you haven't had a look at those models, it's a good model. Different legislation, obviously, and the ability for them to form CCOs is easier than what we can do even in New South Wales. And the other thing that's layering over us in New South Wales is a rewrite of our Act. So we've got lots going on. So grab a copy of the paper, that'll give you a bit more detail. So this is our current thinking for us. When we first started looking at the entity, we thought we'd actually prefer using a county council model, because for us it was easier. We already had a county council as one of our members. So we sat around for quite a while and debated the whole pros and cons of using the county council. It would have been easier in some ways. We could have just changed the constitution or whatever it's called of the county council, take it from a single authority water provider to a provider of other services as determined. Halfway through last year, the panel was starting to think that way too, and interestingly enough, when the panel's second paper came out, they were also supportive of county councils. The backlash across New South Wales was ridiculous, to say the least. It was like we were saying that county councils would become so much more superior and better than all your multi-function. It was just bizarre, the reaction from councils. But it was such a resounding pushback from county councils that it was easier just to pull back and say, well, you know, adopt whatever model you like as long as you're adopting our model. That forced us too to sit back and think, well, were we just going county council because we had a county council? So we sat back and did a bit more work on it. This is what we're thinking at the moment, and it's a joint venture arrangement through a company limited by guarantee. So we would have members. Now, how do I work out the pointer? Oh, no, that's not right. Member councils, and we're not precluding other members. I'll talk in a minute about scale and size, whether we've got enough members to make this entity work. But at the moment, we're just working with the three councils. And I must say too, voluntary nature of our alliance, Wellington opted out of this project. So we're only actually dealing with Cabonne, Blayney and CTW on this project. Wellington are starting to look further west than east because of the lay of the land and their regions and so forth. And their nearest regional city is Dubbo, which is not near us. Anyway, that's a whole other story. So you'd have member councils, you would have a board of directors, you'd have a CEO who would run the organisation, and then underneath that you would have a range of shared services as yet undefined. Our thinking is that you'd start off slow, you could move some in, and then over time you can continue as need arises, you could move any sort of functions into this shared entity. The General Managers Advisory Council would be the day-to-day running of the company. And this structure is not dissimilar to Hunter Councils Inc., which Hunter Councils ROC actually became Graham, help me out, a corporation, and whatever, they're a legal entity.
You've got a legal entity alongside ROC.
Yes. So they already have a company structure over there, and so this model is not dissimilar to theirs. So that's our current thinking on the model. John asked me to talk about the pros and cons, and Graham mentioned very briefly yesterday NESAC, which was a very, at the time was mooted as the solution for future cooperative arrangements in New South Wales, and that was sort of through 2003, sort of to 2009, I suppose. Its model and its intent and its strategies, I think, were quite good. What happened with NESAC was politics and parochialism got in the way. And because it wasn't a legal binding arrangement, it was easy just for it to fall over. And at the time, the then local government minister sort of smacked them on the hand and said, no, go back and actually justify what, because they had spent millions on trying to implement common corporate systems. And when the alliance fell apart, 2 of the member councils went immediately back out to tender to buy another corporate system. So the money that had been spent by these 4 organisations was immense, and the minister just said, well, no, it's not good enough. But then along came Destination 2036, and we haven't really, it's all still sitting there, really. My comment, I suppose, on the pros and cons of the different models is that it really depends on what you want to share, and the level of relationship and trust that will carry you forward. I do think that you need to think about like-minded councils. Our councils are all sort of similarly sized, same geographic issues, same demographic issues. NESAC, that was one of the things in the fallout of that they found that they were 3 little councils with 1 large council, and they always, in the reviews of it all, they talk about the elephant in the room being Armidale, and that the little councils eventually ganged up together and said, no, they're going to take us over. And so they weren't with like-minded councils, and I think that was one of their undoings. And I think that's one of the success factors for our alliance, because we're fairly similar. So, the other body of work that we've been working with KPMG on is the service selection methodology and business case. So we said to KPMG, and I've got to say, I should say too at this stage, the project team for this is the general managers. So the level of leadership being shown on this is, and the time that they're giving to this is, shows the commitment that they've got to it, but also trying to demonstrate to the staff that this is a priority for their organisations into the future. We said to KPMG, and I'll go through these pretty quickly, one more? Yeah. That in defining the methodology, some of the things we needed to be considerate of were the relevance and the function to the member organisations themselves. Obviously, it was about financial and efficiency improvements, because why the hell else would you do it? Except to actually, the flow on from that is also capacity building. HR implications are going to be immense for us, because the unions in New South Wales are dead against us moving people outside of the local government award, and that will be one of our biggest challenges. When we get to a stage where we would want to transition staff from a council to a company, but that's a whole other body of work that we've got to do. Also, risk. The capacity to improve the member councils. As I said, we all struggle from time to time, particularly rural councils, in getting the level of professionals that we need, the level of management and leadership skills that we need. We hope that by maybe pooling people together, you can maybe pay them better than what we could under an award structure. We can give them different conditions, and hopefully that joining together of professional groups, because we've got one planner in one council, they're isolated. We've got one engineer, they're just isolated from their colleagues. Put them together, and that collective thought processes, you just get so much out of it. And the community and geographic considerations, and I'll talk shortly about that, but I think that's the one thing that, whilst we're all singing the praises and hallelujahs of shared services, when push comes to shove and the councillors have got to sit around and make a decision about whether they're going to lose jobs out of their community, stay tuned. So the first bit of work we did with KPMG was to actually define the operating model. So this is our vision, purpose and strategic objectives of what this entity would be. We still don't have a name. Obviously the WBC Alliance would fold and this new entity would arrive out of the earth. The strategic objective that I wanted to point to you mostly is point 4. Going into this, we currently have a strategy of no reduction of EFT. That's quite the flip to how most people go into shared services, because you go into shared services to reduce EFT to get savings. We've gone in there trying to find efficiencies with the EFT that we've got, and with an idea that over time and through natural attrition we'll get a decrease in EFT. But for our communities at this point in time, there was no appetite to be going into this saying this is about job cuts. So that was an important thing. So we've, in this early stages of analysis, we've based it on EFT being the same, just transitioning across. But when we get to the analysis findings, you'll see why that's an interesting point, that reuse of operational efficiencies. Because being small councils, we actually have people that aren't specialising. They're doing half payroll, and then in the afternoons they're on the front counter, and then they might duck around to environmental services and do some of the updates on the cemetery register. That's how flexible people are in small councils. So the efficiencies that we're finding, unfortunately, are one arm of one person and one leg of another person, and how we actually cut them off and move them and put them somewhere else is going to be one of our other big challenges. But the whole intent is to try and get people to specialise so that we're getting those efficiencies from that. So then this is our methodology. These were, so working with the general managers, KPMG worked us through a process where we came up with these 9 what we call design principles. So any service or function that we think we would like to move into the entity has to be assessed against these 9 criteria. So once we identify the 9 criteria, we then prioritise the 9 criteria. So they're weighted. So the top 2, cost-benefit analysis and meeting, improving capability and capacity, are our 2 big ones. Interestingly enough, though, and I was pushing hard at the time, not that I'm actually a decision maker in all of this, I'm their project manager and they're keeping it moving along, and I get to sit back when the hard decisions are made, which is not a bad position to be in. Number 9, the service delivery is an established political priority. That's what I'm meaning about. I think politics is going to be the thing that is going to be the hardest to manage, and yet on our design principles, it's ended up at the bottom. Now, if you were in private enterprise, that's probably where it bloody well should be, but we're in local government, and we know that often we'll put great initiatives up to our elected members or even up to government to work differently, and politics and parochialism bring it unstuck. But these design principles, we then used them to select some services, and they were actually quite a good yardstick for us to measure. I think they're quite robust ways for you to, have a look at a service, assess it against those criteria before you even do any more analysis on them. And it gets rid of that gut feel and, I can't find a planner, so let's do it that way. So what we did then was use those design principles to identify, how am I going for time? 20 functions in the end that we did some high-level analysis on. And they were grouped into 3 support services, service groups, sorry. So the first one was strategic and support services. So we looked at finance, accounts payable, receivable, payroll, HR, ICT, both support and infrastructure, asset and fleet management, and contract and tender management. The specialist services were primarily our environmental services area, plus our designers from engineering. And our direct field services, which I found interesting at the time because I thought that was pretty brave. I didn't think they'd touch looking at our the biggest part of our business, which is our outdoor services. But we did, and probably in the context of the fact that water supply and water treatment, there's a whole other stuff going on in New South Wales about who should own and manage water in the future. And we had a water authority as one of our members, and that CTW provides water to Blayney Cabonne. So there was sort of like a natural fit that you could actually pass the management of water treatment and supply across to CTW whilst the council still maintained the assets. So that's how that one got in there, and I think that's one of the areas that's got the most bells and whistles on it at the moment for us to pursue. But they're the EFT numbers, so you can sort of see we're not talking huge numbers. If you're a big city council, you've probably got that in one department. But for us, across our councils, they were the numbers that we were looking at. So we analysed and had a look at the current functional structure of the councils, which is typical, I don't know when we're going to get away from those 3 key directors. I don't know what it's like in Victoria, but New South Wales, you could walk into just about any council and there'll be a general manager, 3 directors, environmental services, corporate services, and so they're all fairly similar. We looked at FTE and their position descriptions, so this was the bit where we were trying to narrow down exactly what our people were doing. So their position description, probably says one thing, and yet in day-to-day effect they're doing lots of other things. Cost of EFT obviously was a big one. A heap of work around our assets data, including utilisation and depreciation. And the recommendations came back to us from KPMG for this phase 2 was twofold. One was about the savings, the efficiencies that we could achieve, but also we had done some work with Unico a couple of years ago on a fleet review, and KPMG and Unico sort of estimate that we've probably got a couple of $1 million worth of assets lying around that we could probably get rid of. That will focus people, but that'll be a one-off saving. It's not going to be an ongoing saving. Looked at our financial data and also performance data. Now, I've got a hands up who has this in the room because I need to talk to somebody. As Graham said yesterday, New South Wales is really bad at this. So if you think what we don't have and what we absolutely need before we do this is knowing how much it costs us now to deliver that service and how much it's likely to cost us in a shared arrangement, so that we can identify whether it's going to be more efficient or not. And we can't, hand on our heart at the moment, say it costs $5 to process a rates notice and $10 to pay someone. We don't have that data. And KPMG walked in and went, "Where's your data?" And we went. So they were, big organisation like them, they were just going, "You don't have that data?" "No, we don't keep that data." And yet it's going to be critical for our future. And I was sitting having breakfast this morning, I did notice in your paper there's my council websites about your performance data. So, it's just something we can't get away from, really, isn't it? So we looked at those with what we analysed. What did we find? Some interesting things, actually. We did find efficiencies across the service groups, as you would expect, and they're efficiencies, and it's only through centralising, and that has a caveat on it. So if I just focus on the corporate services group that we looked at, there was 34 EFT in there, and it was a range of accounts and HR and payroll, blah, blah. We can't just cherry pick and move accounts, and we can't just cherry pick and move HR. For us to get the proposed efficiency savings, we need to grab them all and move them all, because they've got interconnections that arm does something and that leg does something. So the washout of the findings was that there was 4.2 EFT within the corporate services area that aren't specialised, and that you could either, one, do away with, or two, refocus and get them to be doing services that you're not currently doing. Now, statistics and lies, you can play that whichever way you like. You could then say, well, geez, we're as skint as we possibly can be. Across the whole three councils in all of those functions, where there's only 4 EFT that aren't operating at a specialist level. Well, the reality is we work in Blayney and Cabonne. We've got villages, we need people in those front counters, da-da-da. So that's that side of it. The other side of it is, yes, there's enough evidence for us to move to the next stage. There's enough savings, estimated savings, for us to get into the more detailed business case analysis. And that's what I've just said there. So now we're up to the stage of assessing the return on investment. It's in a slide later, but I'll say it now. Shared services is not a soft option alternative to amalgamation. If you're going to do shared services, it will be as hard and as challenging as if you're going to do amalgamations. So we've got to now work out whether the return on investment for this significant change is worth it at this point for these three councils, and I'll come to John's point too, whether we have scale. Because at the moment, the efficiency savings with no reduction in EFT weren't wow. You didn't go, geez, that's a lot of money we'll save. They were, and I don't want to get into the details of dollars and so forth, but it wasn't really that much money considering the amount of change that's going to be required to achieve it. So now our project team and our councillors and mayors are sitting around going, we need a bit more information, and do we need to change our strategy away from no EFT reduction? Because we crunched some numbers with EFT reduction and it triples the savings that we could get. But, is there an appetite for EFT reduction in small communities in central west New South Wales in the current economic environment, blah, blah, blah? Which councillor is going to be brave enough to prove that and sign off on that and lose jobs out of their community? So, the next step, so scale. The consultants advise us strongly that we have the scale to do this. We've demonstrated, EFT efficiency savings across the 3 service groups, and that you've got enough scale. Stop saying you don't have enough scale. I take that with a little bit of a grain of salt because it's a consultant telling me, and obviously there's more work to be done. But however, we've got a fantastic relationship with the KPMG consultants, and I don't think they're telling us fibs, but I do worry a little bit about the transactional volumes that we've got in some of those, particularly the corporate services area, whether we've got enough volume to move into a shared arrangement. Now, we did think about this at different stages, and there's other small like-minded councils around us that might be interested, but we don't have strong relationships with them, and this is hard enough as it is, dealing with the councils that have been working together for 10 years. You bring a newbie in on the game and that changes the dynamics, and so we think that probably, and that's why if you go back to our model, we had more bubbles up there than just our 3 bubbles. So we think probably there needs to be more members of this entity, but at this stage we're continuing as if it's just us 3. And I think that leads into some of the recommendation, preferred solutions that the panel were putting up about what sort of services could be delivered on a regional basis and what sort of scale. Because you can get too big too. You don't want to get too big that you've lost your local. I mean, let's all be honest, we could outsource payroll to an overseas country tomorrow and we get it a darn sight cheaper than what we run it now. But is that what we want to do for our communities? So, particularly regional. We're just currently now scoping out the next phase, which is the detailed business case, and that's the really hard work of collecting more data. And we had to manage this really carefully because we're asking finance managers. You know, we've each got one finance manager. Can you give us all this data so that we can decide whether we need your job? You know, it's a little bit tricky. So managing and keeping people involved in this and not scaring them too much is the communication is so critical, and the messages that we send is really critical. As I said there, we're looking at the current cost of service delivery versus the proposed, and Brian Dollery is getting a really good run at this conference because Graham quoted him quite a few times yesterday, but that's one of my favourite quotes out of a paper from Brian, and I think it's just so true. We don't know where we are now, so how on earth do we know whether we're going to be better where we're going because we don't have our current situation defined? And that's the nub of where we're at. Until we've got that level of data, we're not going to take too many steps forward in implementing something until we've got that more clearly defined. The challenges as I see them, as I said earlier, the industrial relations will be very, very difficult for us. That was one of the benefits of keeping it, maybe using a county council model, because county councils operate under the local government award. Our award in New South Wales is under review again at the moment. I don't know, the condition, the redundancy entitlements in our award at the moment are quite, well, I'll put my union hat and say I think they're very valuable for our employees, but they're very costly as well because they give them 3 years of that you can't force redundancy through an amalgamation or forced change. So you can carry, you could move 2 organisations together and have double the EFT you might need, but you've actually got to carry them unless they voluntarily go for 3 years. So you can start to see how long your return on investment on some of this is if you can't actually get that reduction in EFT. And one of our tricks too will be the different locations. So the whole concept of particularly the corporate area and the specialist services, not so much the outdoor areas, because that would probably just be managed from somewhere and decentralised like it currently is. The depots would stay where they are, the people would stay where they are. But with corporate and specialist services, it's like, where do we put them? So if they've got to be together, do they go into the council at Blayney, in which case the Molong mob have to travel an hour and a half each day. So you'll start to lose efficiencies there because they're travelling, and so that's going to be a trick. And I should tell you the other thing about us too is that smack bang in the middle of us is Orange City Council, and for a long, long time, as Graham would attest, there has been a strong belief that Cabonne and Blayney and Orange should amalgamate and just be done with it. So our elephant in the room is Orange. And when I talked earlier about having enough scale and scope, it is my humble opinion that if the sooner we talk to Orange about engaging with them on shared services, the better off we'd all be, because you could keep your local democracy and your small little communities, and we could actually do shared services in a meaningful way. But that's my humble opinion. Governance arrangements. We've talked about the fact that we probably have to have some sort of binding agreement that the members would buy the services from this new entity for a period of time, because otherwise it could go belly up. And one of the things we haven't done, which will get done in that business case development, is service level agreements and cost of services. So if I'm going to be a council and I want to go and buy payroll services, I want to know that I'm going to buy payroll services at an efficient and cost-effective, a market value price. We can't set this entity up so that it outprices itself. And we also know that for the first few years, unless we could generate some other commercial income, the member councils are going to have to carry it until we've got that point at which we're getting our return on investment. And, all in the environment where we don't have any spare money anyway. So I don't know how we're actually going to do some of this work. We've talked about that. And the future model for regional cooperation, Graham touched lightly yesterday on strengthening the role of ROCs. They're talking about calling them joint organisations, and that joint organisations could undertake shared service delivery for the region. So that's the other thing, we're just sort of waiting to see how this would fit at a bigger regional level. But as I said, that would probably be out of one of our large city councils like Orange or Bathurst, and so this work will help in that sort of discussions in the future. It's certainly not lost work at all. And obviously, as I said, the strong and sustained leadership and commitment. You get a change in general manager or even in mayor, and this could fall over at any point. So my take-home tips. I'm going to have another drink. I'll give you some take-home tips on two things: on regional collaboration in general terms, and also on shared services. Now I'm just going back through my notes, making sure I haven't missed anything. So, first one, my advice to you is embrace regional cooperation and do something with your neighbours. I had the pleasure of meeting Anthony, Alpine, Indigo and Cowong, and you heard from Dave yesterday, doing some really good stuff up there, and that's the sort of stuff that you should see in particularly rural councils. I haven't worked in a large metro council. The largest council I've worked for is Dubbo City. I've always spent my career mostly in the bush, so I wouldn't profess to tell you how metro councils could do this and whether it would be beneficial, but I can absolutely tell you it's beneficial for rural and remote councils to work together. And I just do something. Do something together, and you start to actually find some value out of it. Pick your partners well. As I said earlier, go for like-minded councils, something that you have connections with, something that you've got relationships with. Work on trust and relationships. One of my favourite lines is about, John was saying about, could I comment on the voluntary versus the legal arrangements of cooperative arrangements. It's like being married. You don't meet someone and get married the next day. You meet someone, you court them for a while, and you agree that, you sort of think the same as me and you want to be in the same place in 10 years' time and you want to do these things with me. So that's when you'd actually jump in and get married. So we're at the stage where we're probably about to get married. We've been engaged for a while. 10 years, it's been a long engagement. But that's the sort of analogy I use, I suppose, in getting you to work on your trust and relationship. And fundamentally, that's a lot of what I do, is connect people, make sure people are informed, put out fires, engage with people, and so it's a lot of relationship management. Be very clear on why you're actually getting together in the first place and why you want to collaborate. And, we're starting to see it all over the place. It's the buzzword, isn't it, collaboration? And there's plenty of examples around Australia, but it seems to be the buzzy word. And it's like, I said to someone yesterday, it's like Groundhog Day, really. We're back here talking about amalgamations, and the solution is collaboration. So, but, it is absolutely valuable. Define your shared vision. The other thing I'd say too is resource it, drive it, and get some early wins. The Alliance was in place for 4 years before I came on board, and they didn't have a dedicated resource to the Alliance. It was being done on the goodwill of general managers and very busy directors. So like anything, it had achieved some great stuff, and then by the time I was coming in, it was starting to die off. This is my job, to manage the Alliance. We get a lot more done because it's got resources to keep it going and driving it. So you can initially probably go in with just a bit of goodwill and, you know, some local relationship stuff, but I think over time really you won't achieve it unless you actually put resources to it. On shared services, similarly to why would you do collaboration, even more so be very clear on what shared services means to you, what the potential benefits might be, and obviously start with the end in mind, and use sound business case. Don't go on gut instinct. Don't think this is just the panacea to our problems like Alliances was in 2003. Now it's shared services. Base your decisions on really, really good data. And that is costly and timely to do, but you wouldn't make a decision as big as this without having it. I've said it at time, the leadership and commitment is essential, and as I said earlier, it's not a soft option. So, let me go back. It is absolutely a soft option if you're going to start off like we did, where you just do some voluntary cooperative stuff together, because you're not really harming anything. You know, if it doesn't work out, you just stop seeing each other. The engagement's off. Whereas if you've actually gone and got married, the breakup's a lot harder. But it's absolutely worth having a go at doing this. But what I'm talking about being hard is that marriage, that actual step of giving up services to something else, to someone else to manage for you, which is a very, very different way to how we operate. And the enablers, obviously, work out what they are. We were lucky enough we had to replace our corporate systems 4 years ago. So through a bit of clever manoeuvring, which I will absolutely take credit for, we got them all under the same system. So it's relatively seamless for them to open up the systems to each other. So if we wanted to, tomorrow, I could have payroll being processed in Blayney for Cabonne. Because we have the same system. That would be one of the biggest challenges to you doing some of this stuff where you have to share information. And I've really learned a lot over the last day or so about, you know, the obvious benefits of cloud technology, and Dave is one of my new best friends, I think, into the future, finding out what he's doing, and also some of the work that's been done by future governments and the others that we've heard from over the last day or so. So, in summary, I'm doing all right on time. Sharing is nice, but nice is not enough. Someone stood up yesterday and said there'd been some research done on shared services in local government. Deloitte's have got a really good research paper, as do Accenture, on local government specific shared services. So if you're interested in reading some more. But that's a good quote from the paper in Deloitte's, and obviously, you know, as I said, we can all play nice until it gets time to see who gets to take the truck home or who gets the alimony money. So that's one of the biggest challenges. So some parting words of wisdom, and it's been in your papers, I think. Control your own destiny or someone else will, and Jack Welsh, obviously, a great CEO. Sometimes you do have to go into total confusion to come out the other side. You guys experienced this already. If you've all come through the other side of massive changes that happened here in the mid-90s, and I did laugh when Kenneth said yesterday, well, you've survived, you're here. It is worthwhile sometimes plunging yourself and going that big step into a big new world, but you've got to be brave and ready for it. So, my gifts to you. Out on the table, there's the LGMA paper, but I also brought another paper that says the 10 mistakes you can make when implementing shared services. Nothing like being positively negative. And there's another one which I just put together, which is just a heap of links. I've done so much research work on this, on shared services, that I just pulled together some of the things that I've read over the time that I think if you're interested in this space, have a look at some of those websites. There's some really good papers and work that's been done, both nationally and internationally. So, thank you very much for your time.
So just in terms of runs on the board, some people here may not be aware that you previously reported that combined saving of what, the $5 million almost?
We're up to 5.2 million now. That's across, yeah, as I said, 55 projects. So we've just about touched every different aspect of council functions. When we went corporate systems replacement, we went joint tender and then joint purchase and then joint implementation, and that saved us $480,000. And one of the councils, Wellington, actually didn't go with corporate systems, the same one. They were an authority site, but just by being in the tender, authority, Civica didn't want to lose them. And they quoted them just before we went to tender, they quoted them a price for upgrade. And by the time we got to the end of the tender process, they'd knocked $80,000 off it just to try and keep them. So that was that's one of the better ones we've done. But, you know, across all spheres of audit and purchasing and asset management and training and joint grant funding. So
$5 million in savings. Any other questions for Donna?
Hi, I'm Winnie Wilson, Regional Council. Congratulations to the hard work you've done.
Thanks.
And I agree with you that the alignment between Arno, Walco, Urano and Kyra, you know, there was a big Godfather Council that everyone thought that they were actually managing better than that. But after 10 years of working towards what you have so well, and you say that it's still as vulnerable as a change in their regime, do you wonder that amalgamation after 10 years of work might have been as one of the better option than the road you've chosen?
Can we turn the camera on? I do have days, particularly the shared services stuff. We're getting to the point where it's, you know, if we do this, we're looking at significant change across just about every function that we deliver. When they started talking about roads, when we started talking about our outdoor crew, and I'm going, oh really? We're going to... It's almost like, well, if you're going to go that far with shared services, what then is the difference or benefits from doing that versus amalgamation? The thing that brings the smaller communities to the battle against amalgamation over and over and over again isn't necessarily about service delivery, it's about local representation and ability to influence decisions and allocation of funds. So if we were able to do this somehow, that you're able to still maintain that local democracy, I think that's worth fighting for. But yeah, it's almost as tough. Mind you, I haven't been through an amalgamation. But the decisions that we've got to make around shared services, I reckon, are probably some that they'd have to sit around and make about amalgamations. So.
I got a connection from Sutherland,
I thought I was the only one down here.
Just a question of scale when you were talking about that. You were talking about introducing, nationally introducing partner accounts. Does your business model, and in terms of then the impact of that on the issue about not being able to reduce CFT and stuff like that, has your business model started to consider about actually growing the business and taking it, say, the pay off the primary base hospital, or in fact, as opposed to looking at just other councils?
Absolutely. And that's where I think some of the rural and regional councils have got an opportunity to actually leverage and become a bit commercial orientated. You go out to some small communities where the local council is probably the best structured organisation with the best systems in town, and the little local businessman down there who's got 10 employees is struggling to buy MYOB and work out how to pay his people. I reckon there's some great opportunity. We did a bit of a business case when New South Wales introduced internal audit. And we all had to start doing a structured audit program and blah, blah, blah. And I could just see consultants and accountant companies out there going like this, going, this will be money for jam. And so we did this model where we crunched the numbers. We figured we could service our 4-member councils adequately, as well as bringing in up to 15 other councils and providing services. We calculated that it would be 2 years before we'd start turning a profit, but we needed seed funding from each of the councils of 80,000 to kick it off. We didn't have the money. But yeah, I think there's great opportunity to expand, and that's where I think that's will lead us perfectly into, how's that for a segue, John? It'll lead us perfectly into what is the future of local government. The future of local government could be that we do lots of different things, including becoming a bit more commercial orientated with some of the expertise that we've got.
Please thank Donna Galvin.
Thank you.